This is hosted by the Coalition, which is a membership organization of 150 different colleges and universities throughout the United States. And one of the great things about the Coalition schools is not anyone can be a member. To be a member of the Coalition, you have to have a commitment to access, affordability, and success. And what that means is all of our members provide responsible financial aid packages and graduate our students in a very quick amount of time. And, as an example, the graduation rates of Coalition schools are 20% higher than the national average. So when you're applying to a Coalition school, you know that you're making a smart choice. If you haven't started the application process yet, or maybe you're still thinking about what schools you're going to apply to and you're a senior or maybe a transfer student, that's perfectly fine. I would encourage you to set up a MyCoalition account if you haven't already. All you have to do is go to mycoalition.org to do that. And one of the best things about the Coalition application is it allows you to create a college list, go ahead and fill out your profile, and that in itself later turns into your application for those schools. One of the advantages of the Coalition is our very easy fee waiver program. So one of the questions is, do any of these factors apply to you? And as long as you check yes to one of those, you can apply to any of our 160 schools absolutely free. So again, if you don't have a MyCoalition account or you're not using that application yet, I would encourage you to do so for the advantages of the quick and ease, as well as the opportunity to use a fee waiver. But, applying to college is super important as your first step, but equally important is making sure that you apply for financial aid. The financial aid application, also called the FAFSA, is already open. So even if you don't know where you're going to college, you need to go ahead and start that process if you are looking to go to school next fall. So tonight, we have some great schools represented. We have Brian Berry, who's the Director of Financial Aid at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. And he'll be going over the FAFSA process with you. He also has several of his staff members that are here that will be helping with questions in the background. And then we have Rebecca Castley, who is the Senior Associate Director of Financial Aid at Boston University. And she has her colleague Jade, who will also be helping answering questions. Rebecca will be covering what's called the CSS profile. The CSS profile is not required by all schools, but many schools do use the CSS profile as a supplemental financial aid form. And so many of you may be applying to at least one of those schools. So she'll talk about how to fill out that application in that form and how it's used a little bit differently than the FAFSA. So with that, I am going to go ahead and hand things over to Brian.
Thanks, Stacy. Appreciate it. So good evening, everyone. We'll talk quickly about, just go through the agenda on the next slide. Again, want to welcome you tonight. My name is Brian Berry. I'm the Director of Financial Aid at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. I'm joined tonight by three of my colleagues, Fred, LaDonna, and Jody, who will be on the question and answering any questions that you may have throughout the event. At Rutgers, we disperse financial aid to over 70,000 students. So we have 3 campuses. So we're very much about access. And I've been in financial aid for many years, and it's our financial aid directors across the country, no matter what school you attend, our goal is to make sure you have the tools and resources you need to make informed financial decisions, because it's a lot at play here. It's a big investment, and now with the current pandemic we're in and changes in circumstances and unemployment and income, financial aid and affordability is even higher on the list when you're looking at college options. So tonight we're going to talk about the FAFSA basics, what the FAFSA is used for, documents that you need to complete the form. We'll talk about the FSA ID. You will hear a lot of acronyms. So FAFSA, free application for federal student aid. FSA ID, which is the federal student aid ID, sort of like a username and password to all federal systems. We'll talk about the eligibility, tax information. We get a lot of questions about what makes a student dependent and independent. Household information that's needed, helpful tips for completing it, some common mistakes, and then at the end we'll wrap up with some helpful contacts. Looking at on the next slide, the FAFSA basics. Again, like I said, the FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and it's actually the first step in applying for financial aid at schools across the country. So this is any school. I want to ensure that when you go to the FAFSA website that you're using either fafsa.ed.gov or fafsa.gov takes you directly to the site. You should not pay to complete a free application. If you go to any other sites that do not have that .gov, it takes you to other sites that are not federal. So make sure that you go there. The FAFSA is available October 1 each year. So now it's October 27. So the FAFSA application is available for the 21-22 academic year. And this is a kind of a quick snapshot of when you go to fafsa.gov, what you will see. So you want to make sure that you're filing for the 2021 application year. On the next slide, the FAFSA is used for many things. So federal, state, institutional financial aid, it's a snapshot of your family's household information at that time. So you're eligible for, you could be potentially eligible for federal Pell Grants, Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, which we call SEOG, federal direct loans. We'll talk about loans that have a subsidized and unsubsidized portion, federal work study, again, like I said, state financial aid programs and need-based scholarships. So it's a way for us to see what the need actually is. So you'll also hear EFC. EFC is expected family contribution. This number is derived by completing the FAFSA, and that takes us into a calculation called needs analysis when we're actually looking to see what the family's need is and then apply it to our philosophies at all schools. So once you file the FAFSA, we'll talk about what to look for in a financial aid package. On the next slide, so the documents needed to complete the FAFSA. So you're going to need your social security number, and this, remember, I know we have a lot of parents on before the student. You'll need the student social security number. If you have an alien registration number or a number, if you are not a US citizen, your driver's license, if you have one, federal tax returns, W-2s, or other information that's needed. Typically, we would like for you to, for a faster and easier way is to complete the IRS data retrieval tool. It's called the DRT, but it's an easy way to, when you log on to the FAFSA, you would need to know a few things. So parents, your filing status, your address listed on your tax returns, I think it's like your first and last name, your date of birth, and then that information is validated and will bring all of your tax information over from the IRS site into the FAFSA for you. So you'll need to have that information, bank statements, typically for investment purposes, and any records of untaxed income or social security benefits that you receive. It's easier to have that with you. If your student also worked and they had a W-2 or filed taxes, you would need that same information for the student as well. So on the next slide, the first thing you need, as with anything, you need a username, and a PIN number to get started. So the first thing you actually want to do before you get to the form is to actually fill out the Federal Student Aid ID form online. So when you go to fsaid.gov, you'll again need the student's social security number, full name, date of birth. You'll also need one for dependent students. Most of you on the event tonight more than likely are dependent. The parent will need to do the same thing. So you will need to have two FSA IDs, one for the parent's signature to sign the form and one for the student to actually submit the application. So social security number, full name, date of birth. You'll need to think of a unique username and password and complete the challenge questions, because you'll have to go and use this FSA ID for many things. If later on you want to make changes to the financial aid application, if you need to make adjustments or sign documents related to loans that you're eligible for through the institution you're applying to, you will also need this as well. So this FSA ID will stay with you for quite some time. When you go online and file, it takes 1 to 3 days for it to be registered on the government site and for you to be able to use it to sign your FAFSA. So say if you want to file your FAFSA next week, it's probably good to start your FSA ID process today. It takes a few days to have that validated, and then you can go back online and file your application and sign your documents with the parent FSA ID and the student's ID. On the next slide, we'll talk about federal aid eligibility. So their list here of eligibility requirements. You have to be a citizen or an eligible non-citizen of the United States. If you are not a citizen and want additional information on the FAFSA website, there is additional information in a list of what makes you an eligible non-citizen to be eligible for federal student aid. You do have to have a valid Social Security number, have a high school diploma or GED, or have completed homeschooling and have documentation of that. You have to be enrolled in a degree-seeking program. So we have to, the government wants to ensure that if federal aid is given to you, that you are seeking on track to seek a degree to actually complete it. You have to also maintain satisfactory academic progress. So just like with scholarships or other awards where you have to have a minimum GPA and credits required to complete, you also have to with federal financial aid. So the school that you're attending will let you know what that satisfactory academic progress is, that GPA and those credit requirements to stay on pace in order to be eligible for financial aid. So this is something that you're actually going to go through each year to make sure that you're meeting satisfactory academic requirements. So it's basically a combination of GPA and credits earned to ensure that you're completing your degree on time successfully. And you also have to be registered for selective service if you are male or currently active duty. So that is a requirement. If you are not registered for selective service and file the FAFSA, the institution that you're attending will follow up for selective service requirements and what needs to be completed to then move forward. So in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about tax information. So I promote this all the time. The IRS data retrieval tool, or the DRT, is very important. So it allows, like I said, if parents and the student filed their taxes, you basically will be taken to another site, the irs.gov website. Once you are in the FAFSA form, you will validate your information, Social Security number, filing status, name, other few personal identifiable questions that you'll be asked. And then once that's validated, the DRT will pull that tax information over. And there's only a few other fields that you may, if you have investments, that you may need to fill out. So here on the third bullet under DRT, so manually entering data on the FAFSA leads to a lot of errors. So sometimes we transpose numbers, or one of the common mistakes is I will see families put their adjusted gross income, just say it's 150,000, taxes paid 150,000. So clearly you can't pay the same amount in taxes that you've earned for that year. So if you can go online, do the data retrieval first. There are some instances where depending on your filing status or where you are with taxes, that you may not be able to complete it. It's pretty rare, and the site will let you know the reasons why, but make sure you do the data retrieval first. If you can have that pulled in, the FAFSA can be completed pretty quickly. For prior year, I listed this here to let everyone know that a few years back, FAFSA changed its regulations to look at taxes from 2 years prior. So if you're completing the 21-22 FAFSA, which is the current one that's open, you'll be asked for your 2019 information. So this is a little bit easier because we don't have to worry about, years ago it was, if you had an extension or you were currently hadn't filed yet, or you missed last year and was still getting together business income or information. This is easier because typically if the tax filing year was 2 years ago, most families have completed their taxes and have the information on hand with them. So students are able to file as soon as October 1, again, of every year, with the 2 years taxes, the previous year taxes are filed. So this is easy and a great way to get it done early and not have to file using estimated information. So we're going to go to the next slide here. When you're in the FAFSA application, you will see this here under parent financials and then student financials. So after you put in, you'll see the checklist here as you go through student demographics, school selection. You can put up to 10 schools on the FAFSA application to send your information to. You're going to go through some dependency status questions, which we'll talk about, parent demographics, and then when you get to the parent financials, it'll say link to IRS. You're going to hit that so you can go answer those questions. When you finish with that, you're also going to go to the student financials, and if the student did file taxes, you're going to do the same thing, and then you sign and submit, and then go to the end where you'll receive a confirmation page. So on the next slide, we did receive a lot of questions ahead of time about the difference between being dependent and independent. So you know, it's easy to say I'm independent, I don't need my parents, or I'm paying out of pocket, but there are federal requirements that make a student dependent or not. So dependent students are required to provide their parent information on the FAFSA, whether your parents are directly assisting with the college process or not. Independent students are required to provide only their own information or their spouse's information if they are married. So typically we hear from these bullets below, parents refuse to contribute to students' education, parents are unwilling to provide information on the FAFSA or for verification purposes. Parents don't claim the student as a dependent for income taxes, student can demonstrate total self-sufficiency, I have a job, I take care of myself, or either I pay rent at home. Depending on the student's unique situation, it may be possible to look at the dependency status, but those reasons there typically would not deem a student independent for financial aid purposes. So some of the dependency status questions will be here on the FAFSA. So if you are not 24, it asks you if you are 24 or older as of January 1 of the year in which you're applying. It'll ask you a question about married or separated, if you're working on your master's degree, if you have children which you support over 50%, if you're currently active duty, if you're a veteran, if any time you were a ward of the court or both of your parents are deceased since you turned 13, if you're emancipated minor or an unaccompanied youth or one that is being risk of homelessness, if you are able to answer yes to these questions with proper documentation, you would be considered independent. If most of these questions you will go through and the answer is no, you are considered dependent and need your parents' tax information to be eligible for federal aid. Here's another quick section on the kind of transferring what I just said into the FAFSA application. Right here on the dependency status checkpoints, this is where you would click if one of those apply to you. If not, you would click none of the above and then continue. You'll hear a lot about household information when looking at the FAFSA. This is a common verification item, and we'll talk about that a little bit when I wrap up the section. Basically, federal verification is after you submit your FAFSA, you submit everything. If we're still like, you know, something looks a little off, or when you go through the matches on the federal side, if something is a flag, or sometimes by random selection, you may have to follow up with additional documentation, and household status is typically one of them. So who is in a student's household? So it'll ask you how many are in the household and how many are in college on the FAFSA. So for a dependent student, it's the student's parents, the student's siblings that live in the household and receive more than 50% of the support from their parents. So just say it's a family of 4, mom, dad, son, and daughter. One is going to college. You would list the parents, the student, and the siblings. So it would be 4 in the household with 1 going to college. If next year sister is going to college, then when you complete the FAFSA, it would be 4 in the household with 2 going to college. So this is important and critical that you fill this out correctly, because it does have a difference of determining your EFC and the actual need. So make sure this is filled out correctly. If not, and you're selected for verification, well, actually, you may have to go through a household form worksheet at your institution where you're listing the members in your household and the relationship. For independent students, if you are independent, it's the student spouse if they are married, and any children that they support more than 50%. So on the next slide, I took this slide from Federal Student Aid that actually provides a lot of great resources. So I would suggest you to visit the site about who to file the FAFSA. So families look very different. Some 2 parents, some 1 parent, some step parents, and this goes through actually who you should be filing with. So are your parents married to each other? If yes, you will report both of their information. If your parents are not married, do they live together? If not, then you would file with one of the parents that you would live with more, or that could possibly support you more than 50%, or that you've lived with more over the past 12 months. So you can go through this, especially when parents are remarried or legal guardians. So please visit or kind of look through this graphic to ensure that you're filing your FAFSA with the correct parent information. On the next slide, some helpful tips in completing the FAFSA. Please, make sure you read the questions carefully. So try not to skip questions or leave any questions blank. Every question will guide you kind of on how to answer it. So the FAFSA form has skip logic. So if you answer specific questions and you don't need to answer the next few, it will skip those for you. You can always hover over the question marks for additional explanation on that. So the FAFSA form over the years has really has really morphed into an application that's pretty intuitive, easy to understand, and it's, you're not dealing with paper forms where if you have follow-up questions, there's kind of nobody to answer your questions. So you can just hover over the question mark or the check marks that are on the FAFSA, and it'll give you additional information as far as the section that you're on. Make sure you're using the correct tax year's income information. So again, for the 21-22 academic year, you need to ensure that you're using the 2009 tax information. You want to review your household size. Again, go through how many parents are in the home, the student, and how many siblings, if so, or other students that are in the household are going to college. So everyone that that resides in your household, people can be included as long as you or your parent provide more than that person's support. So if you have other relatives in the home that your parents do support, or the parent filing the FAFSA supports more than 50%, they can be included in the household size. Make sure you include yourself. Sometimes we do forget that. Remember to sign the application. So you can submit the application without a signature, but it will come back and say that in order to be completely submitted, or for us to review it at the institution and make a decision on reviewing you for aid eligibility, the FAFSA does need to be signed. It will not be complete, even if you do save and submit it. So if you're filing as an independent, both you and parent need to sign, and you can both sign right next to each other with your FSA ID. So I think something good, after the event today, is just go on tomorrow, if you haven't done so already, to fsaid.gov and get that started. So you want to file your FAFSA each year as early as possible. You have to check with the college or university that you're planning to attend for their priority deadlines. There are university merit scholarship priority deadlines. There are need-based priority deadlines. I don't want to give you a date, but typically institutions, it may be around December 1. I probably would say not too many later, unless you're a returning student. It may be they're asking for your FAFSA by January sometime, but to me, definitely before Thanksgiving, make sure you have your FAFSA file. But please make sure that you look at the institution's guidelines and policies that you're planning to apply to make sure that you have it in by their priority deadline for merit scholarships, need-based scholarships, or other need-based awards, and especially the state aid. So depending on the state that you're in, your FAFSA information may be sent to the state agency that awards, and they also have a deadline to receive your financial aid information. So on the next slide here, I just want to talk quickly about helpful contacts and next steps before we go into the next presenter. So federal student aid can be reached anytime at 800-4FED-AID. The slide that I showed you going through the parent information, they also have some great videos at studentaid.gov. So I would suggest that you check that out. FAFSA online, again, fafsa.ed.gov or fafsa.gov to apply directly. Same thing with the PIN, fsaid.gov or .ed.gov takes you to the site. Student Aid Help Center is a great resource. And then if you have questions, the IRS as well. So that's irs.gov. So quickly about next steps. I know that was a lot of information in 25 minutes. But the next steps, after you submit your FAFSA, you will receive a confirmation page. So when you file, you go online, you submit your submit the data retrieval tool, have your income information pulled in, both you and the parent sign, you will receive a confirmation page. After that, a couple days later, you will receive what's called a SAR. So it's the student aid report. Student aid report will basically go through the FAFSA with you. It'll show your answers to all the questions, the schools that you've asked to be sent to, your FAFSA to be sent to. And then it will show you your expected family contribution and some general information from a federal level about what you may be eligible for. Once that information is sent to your schools, it typically takes about 3 to 5 business days, and then you'll have to follow up on your school's timeline for incoming students when they typically award financial aid or scholarships. Some start in December and will go through January, February, kind of along with admissions decisions. So again, every institution is different. The other thing is you may be selected for federal verification. So make sure that each school that you attend, if they are reaching out to you for documents, it is because you were selected for verification by filing the FAFSA. On your student aid report, it will have comments. It will let you know if you are selected for federal verification. And if you are, the schools that you apply to will follow up. It could be a household worksheet. It could be citizenship documents. It could be following up with selective service to make sure that you're eligible that way. So please make sure you look out for any information from federal student aid. And again, do not pay for any service to file the free application. And then definitely your other helpful contacts here will be contacting the institution's financial aid office in which you're applying to. And then, staff like myself and who's on the event now answering questions will sit down with you or Zoom with you and make sure that they're able to answer your questions fully about the process. And I think that was my last slide.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to shift over to Rebecca. Brian, I have one question before we go.
Sure.
Is there, when a family is filling out the FAFSA form, is there a certain number of colleges they can list?
Yes, so the maximum, I believe it's still the same, is 10 schools that you can put on the financial aid application. So you can do a search sometimes on the financial aid website. You can, to each school, you can see the school codes and you can type in the school codes manually, or you can search by city and state, or start typing in the school, and it should come up through the pick list of items, and then you can submit it that way. But 10 is the maximum that you can submit on one transaction.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you and meet you this evening. I'm Rebecca, and I am from the Financial Aid Office at Boston University, and I'm here with my colleague Jade that can help answer questions in the Q&A if you have questions about the CSS profile. As I listened to Brian, no offense, I love the FAFSA, and I do love all things financial aid related, but I'm reminded again why we have the CSS profile, and I have a fondness for the CSS profile, and I hope you will too. So I know that applying for college has a lot of application forms, whether it's for admission and then the FAFSA, and there are a lot of federal regulations and the IRS data retrieval, and it sounds like a lot. And then here we come, other schools, and say, actually, we have one more form we'd like you to fill out. So I'm hopeful that I can help you understand why we require this other form called the CSS profile. In prior years, I used to be able to say, and sure, you'll recognize who puts out the CSS profile. It's our friends at the College Board. They also administer the SAT program. And now that many schools and colleges are going SAT optional, it might not be as familiar to some families, but the College Board does they help us with collecting the CSS profile, and they also do administer the SAT program. So we can start with the first slide. So why do colleges require the CSS profile? So it is required by many schools and colleges, and it's mostly schools and colleges with their own financial aid dollars to give out. So as you heard Brian talking, most of the money that's given out by information on the FAFSA is from either the federal government or the state government. So schools that have their own college financial aid dollars we're thinking, okay, these are the questions on the FAFSA, but I might want to know a little bit more. It's a little difficult to say this as an election is approaching, and I'm not making light of it, but it takes an act of Congress to change the FAFSA or to add a question or change wording. So it can be difficult to get that done. And especially if it's aid administrators that are thinking, I really want to know this, how this is impacting the family's financial situation. So we got together collectively as a financial aid community, and we helped develop this form called the CSS profile. So it really is very similar, and the great news is the information that Brian advised you to collect is basically exactly the information you need to file the CSS profile. The CSS profile just delves a little bit more deeply into the family's unique financial situation. Also, a bit about good news is that many schools that offer funding to international students, if they offer need-based funding, they do require the CSS profile. So I saw some questions, whereas international students cannot file the FAFSA, so you have to be a US citizen or an eligible non-citizen. You can file the CSS profile if you're an international student. I put a link on this page, and it's a great resource to show you all the schools and colleges that require the CSS profile and the schools that are optional for international families. So you can sort by by state or by if it's an international family. So it's a great resource just to see where you're considering applying and if they require the CSS profile. And then also if you're an international family, if that school might be requiring the CSS profile, so they give money to international students. So there's about 300 schools and colleges that require the CSS profile. So I'd definitely advise families when you're thinking about the admissions process to think about the admissions application. Make sure you know all the deadlines and scholarship application, and then the financial aid deadline. So as Brian spoke about, the FAFSA and the CSS profile. It's a good idea to do them about the same timeline because you don't want to put very discrepant information on the aid applications, because then when Jade and I are reviewing them in our office, we might have to reach back out. So I advise having a lovely Sunday afternoon and sitting down and filling them out together. So the aid officers, we definitely have more control of the information that's collected on the profile. Next slide. Okay, so this is pretty much what Brian said. Let's see if I added anything. So federal tax returns and W-2 forms, your asset documentation, this is something different. So many families think like, oh, no, I own my own home. I'm not going to qualify for financial aid. That's not true. So we just want to know the equity in your home. So families also think like, oh my gosh, I have no idea. How do I figure that out? These are the websites. So I know probably we all get emails from Zillow or Redfin. They might tell you, okay, great news, your home is valued at this now. So that is what we use in the financial aid office, and that is fine for you to use. So look up your home's value on Zillow or Redfin, or use another source. And then you want to look at your mortgage. And we only are interested in seeing how much equity you have in the home. So if your home is worth $300,000, but you still owe $250,000, we're only going to be looking at the $50,000 of equity. And again, as Brian said, this is the time where you kind of look around and think, who's in my household using my limited resources? And this, you definitely also want to include the same family members that you put on the FAFSA on your CSS profile. The one bit of information that is going against all of my great news is that there is a charge for the CSS profile. It's $25 for the first school, and then $16 for each additional school. The good news is there's a fee waiver process. It was simpler in prior years because if you qualified for an SAT fee waiver, you would automatically qualify for a CSS profile fee waiver. Now you still can definitely qualify as long as you meet the income and asset thresholds. So file the CSS profile. If you meet their thresholds, the same ones that would have been on the SATs, you just won't be charged at the end. So don't use that as a reason not to consider filing the CSS profiles, because many families qualify for a fee waiver. Next slide. So the main differences are basically four things. So the FAFSA doesn't ask about family-owned businesses. So that's one thing that we do want to know about on the CSS profile, because it just sets your family apart from another family. And what we want to do is really look at the full financial situation of every family. So something also on the FAFSA and CSS profile, and I won't get too deep into tax return information, but on the FAFSA application and the CSS profile, let's say it's asking you for your 2019 tax return information. And it says, okay, at that top line, what is your income? We call it, what is your adjusted gross income? And that two families might say $50,000. So family A says $50,000 and family B says $50,000. Well, family A for that $50,000 has a two-parent household and they both work and they each make $25,000. Okay, they get their $50,000. Where family B, they both work, but one parent earns $150,000 and the other parent owns a business and they have a loss. So they're able to write off $100,000. So if you look at their income, it's both $50,000, but it might be very different and their cash flow might be different. So that's why we look a little bit more differently into what's making up that family's income, not just the bottom line. And we know that we're fortunate to be able to do that with questions on the CSS profile. Also, as we spoke about, we're interested in the equity of your home. And also don't worry if you don't own a home and you're filling it out. We also ask if you rent a home, what's your monthly rent, just so we can consider that and what's impacting your ability to finance college. And then your household expenses. So some colleges, this is asked on the CSS profile, and some colleges might be able to give you an allowance for any medical, out-of-pocket medical expenses. If you're paying for private high school for younger siblings or even for the student, some schools, the CSS profile asks this information, and what the schools are able to do with that information depends upon their availability of funding. So that's what's great about the CSS profile is all the schools have the information, and then if there's a certain school that has unlimited financial aid dollars that every school wishes they do, they can say, okay, anybody that reports that they had out-of-pocket medical expenses, let's allow that in our need analysis. And any student that's going to, that has a sibling that's going to private high school, we're going to give them an allowance for that. Whereas some schools that might have more limited resources might say, okay, we want to know about this and consider it, but we want to say, okay, well, why are they going to that private high school? Is it because they have a learning disability, or is it some other non-discretionary expense? So the CSS profile asks questions so that us in the aid office can inquire further. this is where the biggest difference, one of the biggest difference I think, comes into play. So I love Brian's little chart that you can file to show who's the custodial parent, but we bring everybody to the party. So when you're filing the CSS profile, you're going to file one application with that custodial parent. So make sure it's the same one that you selected for the FAFSA. So that parent is on your CSS profile. Then for your other parent who is no longer married, so if they're divorced or separated from your biological or adoptive parent, we want to know about that household as well. So there's a second application for the profile, sort of like SCSS profile B, for your non-custodial household. So that's where I have a little bit more information on the next slide, because this is one of the biggest differences. So on the FAFSA application, the only place that other parent shows is if they pay child support or alimony into the household, into your custodial parent's household. But on the CSS profile, we want to know about that other parent. So your first step one is to file your CSS profile and list, it's trying to be helpful, and it lists the parents and helps you figure out who's your custodial parent. And if either parent is remarried, it also wants to know about those parents and who are they and what is their information. Then the CSS profile helps you determine who's your non-custodial parent and asks for their email address. So that way they can create a unique login. They will file their own profile. So none of the information will be shared between the parents. So you don't have to worry if they don't want each other to know the information. They're both different secure sites. So you can be rest assured but that parent will get an email to go ahead and set up their CSS profile, and then they will file on their own. So even, let's say if you have your parents got divorced and then both of your parents remarried, we might have 4 parents coming, and we might treat the step parents, we might assess their income differently. It doesn't say that we will take a very high contribution. We just need to know what's going on financially with that family. If it's impossible, and we definitely understand that there are situations where you cannot get the CSS profile from your other non-custodial parent, many schools and the College Board even has a form to help you waive that information. So we don't want to make anyone have a dangerous situation if there's no contact. That's what schools want to know about, but most schools have their own, or they use the College Board's form to waive that non-custodial. But a big tip is, once you filed the FAFSA and CSS profile, or even just the FAFSA that schools require it, many colleges these days have portals. So at BU, we call it the MyBU portal. I'm sure many colleges have different names. Just make sure that you log into that portal and make sure the college received your application. So give it a few days. Make sure they received your application and that they're not requesting something else. So sometimes what happens is you submitting it makes another form go into a required status. So you want to just make sure to give yourself peace of mind. Of course, you can call or email, but most schools have portals to show you, so you can actually see it for yourself. You can say, phew, they've got my applications and I know they have that. So it's just a good practice to get into after you submit them. And I think that's my last one. One thing I also wanted to mention about the CSS profile is a little different than the FAFSA, is that there's a big box for special circumstances. So if you feel, I know there was a lot of questions on the applications, but they didn't ask about XYZ that's impacting your family. They asked about all of this, but we're also, sending money to my grandparents living abroad, and this is a big impact to my family. That's what we want to know about. So there's a big box for special circumstances. It's a free form box, and we do review those in the aid office, and that helps us to think, oh, okay, this is what's going on, and this helps explain something. Also this year with 2020, many parents many parents have been furloughed or there's job loss. So we're asking for your 2019 information on the FAFSA and the CSS profile. So you should use your 2019 income. But if things have greatly changed in 2020, let us know and use that special circumstances box. And we might reach out and say, oh, okay, can we see more information? But let us know what's going on. We really do want to help in financial aid offices. And that's why we have that box for special circumstances. But that is the generalities about the CSS profile.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. I do have a couple questions that have come in. I know that there's been a lot of Q&A tonight. So thank you for your questions, and thanks to your teams for answering so many of them so quickly. So Rebecca, obviously a question that we had gotten in was the change of financials this year because of COVID-19 and other things that have happened. And so it's good to know for the CSS profile, you can certainly include it there. Brian, what would you recommend for families whose, their 2020 income is going to be very different than their 2019?
Sure. So you will hear at most schools across the country, they have a process. Either you will see it called professional judgment, or a change in family circumstances, or a special circumstances process. And basically on the either form section, or if you look on the institution's website, basically there will either be forms or a way to notify the office that incomes have changed. So there will be, for reasons as unemployment, loss or reduction in business income. There will be additional separation of parents, or anywhere where the snapshot of your income is very different than it was when you submitted the FAF. So you will contact the institution directly. When we gather additional information from you, we may ask for unemployment statements, what that loss of business was, updated tax information, and then we will determine, make those calculations and determine a new EFC, and you could potentially be eligible for additional federal aid or state aid, or additional institutional funds, just depending when. Some schools do have a waiting period. So if you are unemployed, they may ask you to wait 6 to 10 weeks before submitting. Typically with COVID, I think now our offices are just used to taking that information now and doing the calculations, but definitely notify each institution that you're attending, and they can do a calculation for you.
Thank you. Another question, if you could again kind of reiterate how you get the ID, the FSA ID, and then is that the parent and the student? So if you could just give everyone a couple of reminders of how to make that happen.
Sure. So you're going to go to fsaid.ed.gov. And that takes you to the site to actually create the FSA ID. So for dependent students, which will just be under the assumption that everyone's dependent, you would file a FSA ID for the student, and then you do it for one of your parents. If you are independent, you would just need to submit the FSA ID for yourself. But for many of you in high school, it would be, and you live with your parents, it will be one for the parent and one for the student.
Great. Rebecca, are there any assets that aren't considered in the CSS profile?
That aren't considered? That's a good question. So there is. So any asset that is a traditional retirement account, so typically, you hear them 401k, 403b. So those aren't considered in the financial aid calculation. It is a question on the CSS profile. I think we're collecting data in the financial aid world to see what we get. So it is asked, but they're not considered as part of the calculation. So traditional retirement accounts. Now, if you have a rental property and you think to yourself as your family, this is my retirement plan, I'm going to sell this rental property, that's still considered an asset. So it still needs to be reported on the CSS profile, and it will go toward the calculation. And also for retirement accounts, something often forgotten and by families, and why you should have your W-2s available, is because while the total amount in your retirement account isn't put toward the financial aid calculation, the annual amount you're contributing, so it's usually on box 12 or 14 of your W-2 form, that is asked on both the FAFSA and CSS profile. What's the annual amount you're contributing to your 401k or 403b? So that is on both applications.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Another question is, what if you've applied to more than 10 schools, and so you want to also list more than 10 schools on the FAFSA. Whoever wants to take that question, what's the possibilities there?
So I think I listed one in the chat, a link. There's a few options you can do. You can either call the FSA FAFSA hotline and add additional schools. You can go in and make a correction to your FAFSA and take a few of the schools off. Once a few days processes, your student aid report is sent, it's sent to the schools. You can make a correction to your FAFSA, go back into FAFSA.gov, make a correction, take a few schools off, add the new ones, and then you can resubmit that way. And that way it will go to 10 plus the ones you add.
So Rebecca, I know that we've had several questions about international students, and you have mentioned that some schools allow the CSS profile. How would one go about finding out about that, and if they should fill it out for that particular school to see if they might be eligible?
Sure. So you can either start in two places, the particular school or college's website, and they typically will highlight if they offer, you'll see it called need-based scholarship for international students. And if you see that, most likely they do require the CSS profile, or you can use, if you just go to the CSS profile College Board site that I linked on that one of the first slides, there's a listing of all schools, and you can, at the top of that page, it's great, there's sort bars. So if there's actually a sort bar for international applicants, so if you sort just on yes, you'll only see schools and colleges that do require the CSS profile from international students who would like to be considered for need-based scholarship. And I was playing around with it today, and it was quite a robust list. I was happy to see. So I think it's a great tool for international families to use to see what schools might have funding to offer to international students.
Is there a deadline for the CSS profile?
Great question. So yes, and this is where I think it's really important not to think of, and it's great that we're here with the coalition application that's typically for admission. You shouldn't think of the application for admission as this one process and then, oh yeah, I should probably think about financial assistance. They should go hand in hand. So at BU, our deadlines mirror the same as the admissions application. So financial aid and admission, we have the same applications for FAFSA and CSS profile. So you have to have them both in. So for early decision, I know it's coming up, it's November 1st, Sunday. So early decision for both, it's November 1st, whereas regular decision, we have January 1st. And then for returning students, we have different more lenient deadlines, but I think it's really important for applicants because schools have limited financial aid dollars, and you want to make sure that you do everything you can to be eligible and be considered, and that's completing the forms by the deadlines.
Thank you. Brian, you had mentioned in the beginning, you need an SSN number or an alien resident. What if you don't have an SSN number? Maybe you've lost the card or didn't apply for one, especially right now as offices are closed. What are kind of the options for families who need to apply for financial aid that might be missing a critical piece?
Sure, I'm going to put one of my staff on the spot. Fred, can you answer that for me? If you're listening or if you are buried in chat. Hold on a second.
I am here, Brian. Sorry, I caught part of the question, but I was a little buried in chat.
So if a student it needs to file a FAFSA and they don't have a SSN number or something happened, I know I saw one question about I know the Social Security office was closed. What are you advising students to do in this period of time if they don't have a Social Security number?
Unfortunately, they won't be able to create the FSA ID without the Social Security number or the other required information if they're not eligible non-citizen. They will have to have the number. They don't necessarily have to have the card with them to do it if they know their number, but they do need to have a number. Otherwise, they'll never be able to be confirmed, and their approval will never go through. So their FAFSA will never officially be submitted.
Thank you. I know we have just a couple minutes left. I was wondering if each of you could share, something you'd want to reiterate that's really important about the process, or advice you would give our students and families tonight.
Sure, I'll start. I think it's important to start the process as soon as possible. So like I said, we're at the end of October. So I think it's important, if you haven't already, do the FSA ID, submit your FAFSA, start looking on the websites of the colleges that you're interested in, just for tuition and fees, their process, appeal procedures, special circumstance forms, and the deadlines are important. So I know Rebecca went through the deadlines at her school. We have some different at Rutgers, so it's important not to hear one deadline and think it's a universal thing, to make sure that, if you have your top 3 schools and you have it narrowed down, to make sure what those requirements are from a financial aid standpoint is important. I hear a lot of families say, we make too much money, we're not going to be eligible. So I still say file the FAFSA. If you make $15 million, you will still be eligible for a federal direct loan. It will be unsubsidized, but it's at a lower fixed interest rate than most private loans out here. So you will receive something from the institution. So I would say still have your FAFSA on file. You never know. If your income is different than it was from our prior year when you submitted your information, definitely communicate that to the school. We have some flexibility at institutions for awarding financial aid, so definitely communicate and do it early, because in our busy times, we get very busy, phone, email. Where most of us are not, we're not doing walk-ins, we're doing virtual appointments, but definitely don't let that wait too long.
It's nice, I would say the same. File the aid applications by the deadline, even if you think you won't qualify based on the information, because we need somewhere to start. So if things have gone awry in 2020, we need those aid applications to start. And Brian used the term before, professional judgment. That's what us as aid administrators, we have this power, federal power, to adjust data elements, but we need to start with your aid application. So it's always good to file. There's one website that I love, it's called My Intuition, and it's a listing of schools and colleges, and it's a quick 5-minute estimator of how much aid you could qualify for at that college. It's not every college, but it's a great way to just start seeing how much you could qualify at each school. So that's an exciting way. And I find it exciting after you file the FAFSA, you get your expected family contribution. So it's sort of fun. Use it, you have your family, you can guess what yours might be. Unfortunately, the CSS profile, you don't get one at the end because each school treats information a little differently. But financial aid we're here. I hope you see, like Brian and I and all of our coworkers, we want to be helpful. So reach out to us, and that's why we're here. So if you don't reach out, though, we can't help you. So file the forms, and then we're here to help.
I will say something funny that I probably shouldn't as a financial aid administrator, but when you see your expected family contribution, you may say, we definitely did not contribute this. So just know it's not a number that we come up with. It's a federal calculation, but more than likely what they say you can contribute in that academic year, once you look at your checkbook, you probably say we can't, but just know, again, as Rebecca said, it's a starting point. It's how you determine need. It depends on the cost of attendance of the school you're attending, based on financial aid. So let the schools do the work. Don't do too much guessing on your end, but definitely the EFC will be higher than you think you'll be able to contribute.
Sure.
Thank you. Well, we're just after the hour, so I do want to be conscientious of your time. So thank you so much for joining us. So thank you to Rebecca from Boston University and Brian from Rutgers, and all of your teammates who have been doing an awesome job answering the questions tonight. Families, I know that we put some great links in the chat that you can refer to. Also, we will send this presentation out to you if you have questions, so you can watch that again. Thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't already, please start your MyCoalition account and follow us on Instagram, where you can find out about other great programs like this, as well as great college and affordability information. So thanks to everyone, and good night.